and his sacrifice. The Korean War has often been called the Forgotten War, and that is true especially for those who served, like Corporal Calvillo, in the solitude of captivity, and those that never came home. And we take this moment to reflect and pay our respects before that opportunity passes away and we can no longer say thank you to the few that remain. At this time, I'll call upon our member and our past president, Chuck Lasardi, to give a brief overview of the ceremony.
Thank you, George. Welcome to everyone here. Thank you all for all you have done to make this an event that we will always remember. I asked George if I could take a minute and say a few words regarding the fact that this all came about because Sarah and I first met David at the Oregon Korean War Memorial in Wilsonville. And it was several months ago. David mentioned that he had served in Korea with the 2nd ID and on the DMZ 2 tours, I believe, right, David?
Correct.
And that he had belatedly found out that his uncle had also served with the 2nd Infantry Division back in 1950 and during the Korean War, at which time he had been taken prisoner and spent the balance of the war as a POW. David expressed a desire to have a formal presentation of his uncle's awards while it could still be done, and that sounded like a pretty good idea. The rest is history. David coordinated with his family members near and far, we contacted our chapter here. This is the Oregon Trail chapter of the Korean War Veterans of Oregon, and we're the only chapter left in the state. But when we asked for support from the different departments, whether it's the ODVA, Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs, or the Oregon Military Department, or the Adjutant General's Office, they are always quick to respond. So in contacting the department, gathered some willing officers and men. We have Colonel Miller here, who came to officiate and actually do the presentation. Sergeant Raff, who I've been emailing back and forth with, and we also had the Command Sergeant Major, who had to leave early but had an opportunity to meet Robert, and we have our Public Affairs Sergeant, Sergeant Holden, who's taking care of making the documentation of this gathering here today, and we'll have that for future reference. Basically, that's what took place to get this to the point that we're at, and I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to both meet Robert and his family, and I want to thank all of those who have participated to help make this event just what it should be, something to remember. Thank you.
Our next speaker is David Pinafore. David is our special guest nephew. He is also a member of our chapter. David served 6 years in the United States Army with 2 tours in Korea between 1975 and 1977. And I'll ask David to come up and to introduce his Uncle Bob, who is our special honoree today.
Thank you. Very honored to be here among distinguished guests today. Thank you for coming. My name's Dave Pinaflor. I served 6 years in the U.S. Army and 2 tours in Korea. Between 1975 and 77. After being out of the service for many years, I saw an old photograph, actually it's right here on the table, of my Uncle Bob. I thought was getting off an airplane. He was wearing a military khaki uniform, a 2nd Infantry Division patch, corporal stripes, and a cap. I asked my mom about this photograph. She said, it's my Uncle Bob walking down a ramp of a ship coming home from the Korean War and was a POW. This caught my interest and called my uncle, asking about the photograph of being a POW in the Korean War. He asked me, you mean your boots were on the ground in Korea? I didn't expect that. I said yes. And he began to tell the story that it was cold and chaotic leading up to his capture and desiring more information to what had happened. This was when I decided to research and find answers for my uncle. First contacting by phone the president of the Korean War Prisoners of War Association, who helped me out. With authorization from my uncle, and months later, I received my uncle's military and medical records and a copy of his DD-214, listing the time in service and his medals. During my research, my uncle held 3 different status: missing in action, killed in action, and prisoner of war. Also in my research, a timeline account of his unit entering the Korean War up to his capture. Emails and phone numbers of soldiers from his unit, Bravo Company, Field Artillery, 2nd Infantry Division. After I completed my research, I sent him all this information, forming a large binder with many pictures, which he received and was very grateful. This is my uncle's story. Corporal Robert Calvillo was born August 21st, 1929, in Oakland, California, the 2nd of 8 children. He enlisted in the Army in 1948 at the age of 19 for a 3-year enlistment. He started his military basic training at Fort Ord, California, and then to Fort Lewis, Washington for training. Later, he boarded a troop ship that sent him to fight in the Korean War, arriving August of 1950. Attached to Bravo Company, 2nd Infantry Division, again Field Artillery. A few months later, he was captured, December 1st, 1950, at Ku Ridi, becoming a prisoner of war. Then marching up to the Yalu River in the coldest time of winter. He remembered not having no winter gear, staying in small villages along the way, arriving on the border of China and North Korea. He was held in prison camp number 5, where the conditions were bad. And most of the time, the meal of the day was soupy soup. Many times he faced serious health conditions that could have cost him his life, and the hardships of losing many friends. It was mental and psychological torture, not knowing your future, if you will ever see your family again. One day, a Chinese officer notified him that he was to be released. At first, he didn't believe this, thinking it was propaganda. But in his heart, he wanted it to be true. Then the news came out that it was true. He was to be released later, picked up by trucks and driven to a train station and boarded boxcars. Then the American helicopter picked up by American helicopter pilots and ended at the Freedom Village for repatriation. He received a medical evaluation, treatment, food, a new uniform. Later boarding a troop ship back to America, where his family was waiting for him to arrive in San Francisco. Fellow soldiers in arms, ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you my uncle, Corporal Robert Calvillo.
Thank you. Please be seated. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Colonel Ivor Miller. Colonel Miller is the recruiting commander for the Oregon Military Department, and we are honored to have him present to preside over the presentation ceremony. Colonel Miller.
I think everybody can hear me, right?
Yes, sir.
I don't talk real soft, so I guess that's why they made me a recruiting commander. It's an honor to be amongst you today, to have family and friends, to recognize your sacrifice and to be amongst warriors. So, okay.
Thank you.
When first asked, I said absolutely. I live in Wilsonville. I work out of Salem. I said I'd be honored to be here and recognize Corporal Calvillo. It's an honor to be amongst all of you here, to be amongst warriors who served in one of our trying wars. And it is my honor to be up and recognize his sacrifice, determination, and willingness to come back to us and represent the spirit that the American military soldier represents. Corporal Calvillo, will you join me up here?
Yes, sir.
We're gonna turn around.
Okay, great. The first medal to be presented is the Prisoner of War Medal.
I'm gonna go here, and then I'm gonna go across here.
All right, the second medal is the National Defense Service Medal. The next medal is the Korean Service Medal. The next medal is the United Nations Medal. And the last medal is the Korean Service Medal presented by the Republic of Korea.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, sir.